Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and on this episode we're doing a top 10. Topic of the top 10? Top 10 times fans stop watching. And as you can tell by this is when wrestling fans decided they're going to give up on wrestling. There's no reason to continue watching it. Pre-warning before we go in here, there are going to be some things that are pretty serious covered here. Some things more lighthearted. If anything does trigger you, we are going to talk about murder. We are going to talk about suicide. So, if that does trigger you, feel free to not watch the rest of the video. With that being said, we're going to jump right in, and this is going to cover pretty much all the national wrestling companies that were seen on a wide base. So, while stuff like the Knoxville Wrestling War of the late 70s really killed that territory, or the Georgia Wrestling War of the early 70s put a real damper on that territory because it was just a territory, things like that weren't considered. I do know it did. Both those things drove a lot of fans away, so I do understand that. And I want to put that caveat out there because I know people name them in the comments, which is cool too. First up, number 10, Claire Lynch and Tna. I've mentioned it before that I don't think in concept the Claire Lynch sounded like a bad idea. The actress they hired and the subsequent problems from that is where it went into some bad territory. That, along with the fact that not only are you having Dixie Carter, who's not a good on-screen actress, you have three of your better wrestlers, Christopher Daniels, Frankie Kazarian, and AJ Styles, tied up in this Maury Povich, whose baby, drug addiction, cheating, just a bad angle in my opinion. And I don't think there was ever any real direction, and if there was, that direction was killed really quickly when Claire Lynch's actress decided she no longer wanted to be part of this because she was getting some harassment from wrestling fans. And not saying that she did a great job, but she definitely didn't deserve that. I mean, coming as someone that was an actress outside of the wrestling business, she did not deserve the treatment she got. Even if I don't like this, I do have the opportunity to change the channel. And as toxic as fans could be, they were very toxic on this. Other than that, along with them being toxic to her, a lot of people really turned off and turned away from the TNA product because of this angle, and because of that, it makes our list. And you are going to see there are going to be a lot of repeat offenders on here. Now, our number 9, World Class Championship Wrestling, introducing a fake Von Erich, Lance Von Erich. Now, the original team of Waldo and Fritz Von Erich were not really brothers. It had long been accepted, though, after Waldo was out of the territory, the Von Erich family was all canon family after that. Whether it be David, Michael, Chris, Kerry, even Lacey much later on, and Ross and Marshall now. Everybody with a Von Erich name was a real Von Erich. And they were so intrinsically tied to Dallas, and I know I mentioned we were going to talk about territories. We weren't going to cover territories, but the Dallas territory was being shown on cable. It was being shown on ESPN. So at this point, it had become a worldwide territory. Specifically in Dallas, people knew who Lance Von Erich was. He was a sports star. He was an athlete in high school. People knew the real person. And knowing that, and knowing him as someone, I believe, and I might be wrong on this, he went to school with Kerry Von Erich. with them being so tied to the community and the community knowing who this was and knowing this wasn't a real Von Erich, it really turned off a lot of the fans, and it really made them think, what else is WCCW lying to us about? A lot of fans, and I know a lot of people that I talked to that were super fans at the time, really decided to turn this off and decided to leave the show because of this, and because they were lied to by the Von Erichs, who were the ultimate baby faces. Now, coming from that, we're going to go into our number 8, and this is one of the ones that affected me a lot more than most people, and a lot of it's my own, how should I say, naivety, or just wanting something to be what it is or be better than it was. ECW December to Dismember. I can't even say it. So there was hope with ECW One Night Stand and ECW's the second One Night Stand that WWE bringing the ECW product back. Yes, I knew it was not going to be what it originally was, but I had hoped there'd be some semblance of what ECW was, and I was an ECW super fan. If there's any point in wrestling in any company that I would consider myself, that's my company, that's the company I'm the biggest fan of, it's ECW. And the writing was on the wall from the first episode of ECW on TNN. I mean, it wasn't a great show. A lot of what made ECW special was taken away. And I was looking at it through rose-colored glasses. I knew there were growing pains. There was still some good on there. We had the rise of guys like CM Punk on the show. Johnny Nitro, John Morrison rose up on the show. We had different things. Rob Van Dam, Kurt Angle being involved, that made it wasn't ECW, but there was hope that it might be better. All that hope was extinguished when December to Dismember. I don't know why I can't say that. December to Dismember happens, and it destroyed any ECW's fans' hope for WWE treating ECW the way that ECW should have been treated. It made it really 1,000% clear, not that it wasn't already clear, but all hope was lost at this point. This was the point where ECW went from, okay, it might be something new, it might not be ECW, to this is just WWE's garbage. And it was a third-rate show that they didn't care about. And this is quite possibly the worst pay-per-view in the history of wrestling. Problems all up and down the card. A lot of people that I know that were ECW fans and came back for this, and as soon as they saw this pay-per-view, they turned the show off. And they stopped watching anything WWE related. Now from that, we're going to go to our number 7. And this was one that I remember vividly, but I don't think a lot of people talk about this as a real jumping off point. WrestleMania 9, the main event of Yokozuna versus Bret Hart. Yoko beats Bret Hart through cheating, and immediately Hulk Hogan comes down and beats Yokozuna. At the time, I definitely remember this was a lot of people were tired, because if you were a WWF fan and you had been watching since the Hulk Hogan Rock and Wrestling era, and you were watching Bret Hart go from the Hart Foundation to the Intercontinental Champion to where he's in the main event of WrestleMania, you were really bought in on that, and you really were riding that ride with him. For them to not only have Yokozuna beat him, which I think would have been okay, I think fans would have accepted that, because fans accepted Yokozuna. The problem was, Yokozuna not only beat him, but immediately lost to Hulk Hogan. So you basically, it would be the equivalent of giving somebody a brand new sports car, they start driving it around, it has a little bit of a battery issue, and instead of jumping it and keeping that car going, you take that away and give them their old car that's a piece of garbage with a new coat of paint on it. And that's kind of what they did to the public. A lot of my friends that were in, and I was in a middle school age at this time, I believe, a lot of my friends that were WWF fans stopped watching because they were Bret Hart was their guy, and they were tired of Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan had ran his course. As evidenced by WrestleMania 10, Hulk Hogan's not even there on that show. So within a year, he's not even part of the company. And you see, to me, I think this was part of when the WWF had a slide in the early to mid 90s because people just got sick of Hulk Hogan. Now, speaking of Hulk Hogan and the WWF, our number 6. What has come to be known as Black Saturday. Vince McMahon buying out Georgia Championship Wrestling and putting on WWF in its time slot on a TNT network. It's been covered a million times how much of a failure it was, how much that this put a rift between Ted Turner and Vince McMahon. You had the fans of Georgia Championship Wrestling, which was a very much Southern-based wrestling program, were not inclined to like what WWF was giving them, and it was a different product. I always say the delineation between wrestling and sports entertainment, usually it's the easiest things to point to is the Jim Crockett era versus the WWF of the 90s. Jim Crockett was still doing pro wrestling. Georgia Championship Wrestling at this time was still doing pro wrestling. WWF was doing sports entertainment. It's a different style. And not saying that one is better or worse than the other, but people turned off their television in droves. So much so that they tried everything they could to get Vince McMahon off of the channel. They added a new show with Bill Watts' promotion Mid-South. Eventually, Vince sells out to Crockett, which funds WrestleMania, not after the damage was done, and not after a bunch of fans were ran off from watching wrestling altogether. Now, coming off of that, our number 5, like I said, we're going to see a lot of the same culprits come up over and over again. TNA turning the reins over to Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff. Much like what I just said about Georgia Championship Wrestling being an alternative to WWF at the time, TNA was an alternative to WWE at the time. TNA kind of carried on the flag of WCW with a little bit of ECW mixed in. Also, they started bringing in the Ring of Honor mat-based influence. The X Division was really a standout, and it kind of carved its own niche. It carved its own lane. Whereas fans of TNA weren't necessarily WWE fans, and vice versa. Bringing in Hogan and Bischoff immediately turned TNA from being its own separate entity to WWE Light. And it really killed the TNA loyalists. They took away the six-sided ring. They started pushing all the ex-WWE guys. Decisions were made that just weren't good for the show. Hogan and Bischoff were all over everything. They were on screen way too much, way past the point where they were worth being on screen. And to me, I don't think TNA ever recovered until the point that they sold to Anthem, and now they've got their own niche back again. Anthem has kind of built TNA back. It's nowhere near where it was in its heyday, which, let's be honest, it was never a real competitor to WWE. But now it has a solid following. People tune in every week. The shows are good. Hogan and Bischoff, to me, A lot of the decisions going head-to-head on Monday night, getting rid of the six-sided ring, they took away everything that made TNA special and different and drove away those fans that watched TNA because of that. Now, number 4. You could say I'm singing the same song in a different key. Here's a cover of the last song. Jim Herd being hired to run WCW. Much like I said with Hogan and Bischoff with TNA, Jim Herd came into WCW and basically did the same thing a decade and a half earlier. He made WCW more cartoony when it was based on the wrestling. He took it from a pro wrestling show, made it a sports entertainment show. And again, I want to emphasize, I'm not saying sports entertainment is bad. I am saying it's a different style. WCW had been built on the backbone of Jim Crockett Promotions, on the backbone of Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair, the Four Horsemen, the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express, the Road Warriors. Famously, Jim Herd runs off Ric Flair, possibly, if not their biggest star, one of the 2 or 3 biggest stars, along with Sting and Lex Luger. Within a year, he runs off the Road Warriors. Arguably, one of the 2 or 3 greatest tag teams of all time. I personally think the Dudley Boys are just slightly above them, but I will not argue someone that says that the Road Warriors are the greatest tag team of all time. You can make an argument for both. He also runs off another one of the great tag teams of all time when he runs off Jim Cornette and Stan Lane. Everything I've heard about Jim Herd, no one's ever said anything positive about him in a wrestling standpoint. They all say how inept he was, how he didn't understand the product. He wanted to make the Nature Boy Ric Flair, which still works in 2022, 30 years ago, he wanted to say that was out of date, and he wanted to change him to Spartacus. Think about that. Ric Flair would have multiple world championships after this. He would go on to have a decent run in WWF. He would go on, come back, and have more good runs in WCW. He'd have runs all the way through the 2000s. And even now, he's going to, at the time of this recording, in a few months, I believe it's a few months from now, he's going to have a retirement match. I don't want to personally see it, but he's absolutely one of the biggest stars and well-known names in the history of wrestling, and definitely, at that time frame, the most bankable guy they had on the roster. Luger, him, and Sting were the 3 most bankable talents they had. And Jim Herd ran him off. Ran off the guy with the biggest credibility. Now, coming from there, we're going to stick in the world of WCW and making bad decisions on who they let run it. WCW hiring Vince Russo. Vince Russo would tell anybody and everybody that will listen to him that he is solely the man responsible for WWE's Attitude Era, where that's just blatantly not true. Did he have some great ideas? He fantastically did. Even in WCW, he had some good ideas. The difference between his WCW run and his WWE run and anything that came after his WWE run is any idea that Vince Russo had to be filtered through Vince and Kennedy McMahon in WWE. Given free reign, we found out that Vince Russo thinks that belts are just trinkets. We get David Arquette as a world champion, which I don't think is a terrible decision. I'm much more friendly on it than a lot of people are. We get needless Viagra on the pole matches, stupid gimmicks, way too many worked shoot promos, which were shocking the first few times you've seen it, but when you see it pretty much once a week, it's not as shocking. Too much digging behind the curtain. Too much swerves for the sake of swerving people. And he pretty much was the guy that put the final nail in the WCW coffin. Even though WCW soldiered on after Vince Russo, He was the guy that gave it the mortal wound, in my opinion, which eventually killed it. And it killed off a lot of the fans. Gotta remember, WCW did build back up where there were WCW fans and there were WWE fans. Jim Cornette famously says, during the Attitude Era of the late 90s, there was more than 10 million wrestling fans watching wrestling every Monday night. At the time of this recording, we're down to 2 million. So in 20 years, 8 million people went away. And a lot of them, half of that audience, left when WCW left. And by the end of WCW, they had already dwindled down a quarter of their own audience to where they were no longer profitable. And I would say a lot of the blame for that goes on the shoulders of Vince Russo. Now our number 2. Going back to World Class Championship Wrestling and Fritz von Erich faking a heart attack. Now, World Class famously has had its history of tragic events, whether it be the Von Erich clan and their various deaths, Gino Hernandez's death. At the time Fritz faked his heart attack, the fans had already gone through so much and they had already cried so often for the Von Erich clan that seeing Fritz von Erich fake a heart attack on television, it really drove them away. They didn't want to cry anymore. You watch wrestling to take you away from the real world and your problems in real life. You don't watch wrestling because you want to cry. You watch wrestling to make you laugh. You watch wrestling to make you smile. Yeah, sometimes you do cry. Sometimes you do get angry. It's part of the roller coaster. However, it got to the point where watching World Class, you just had nothing but bad news over and over and over again. To me, a lot of people point to this moment as the moment that World Class went from being one of the top promotions in the world to leading to its eventual downfall. Now, before we get into our number 1, we do a thing here called the best of the rest. Basically, it's things that were considered for the list but didn't quite make it. First of the best of the rest, Monday Night Raw number 1000, which officially signals Raw going to 3 hours. Now, while it didn't directly lose fans because of this, the 3-hour Raws have been so laborious and such a chore to watch, and it's very obvious that they can't stretch the show out and make a compelling 3 hours. Have there been good 3-hour Raws? There definitely has been. But more often than not, 9 times out of 10, there is a ton of filler. There's a ton of boredom on the Monday Night Raw shows. And in my opinion, it's not going to get better until they decide to go back. And I don't think they ever will. Nick Khan famously has said how much more money 3-hour Raw makes him than 2-hour Raw would. I don't think the station wants him to go back. I don't think they want to go back. I don't think they want to turn away the money. But it's turned away fans. Fans stopped watching directly related to the fact that Raw has become boring for the most part. Again, it wasn't the exactly that moment, but as you can see, go back, look at the ratings, and I know there's other factors. Look at the ratings when they stopped and they went to 3 hours permanently to where they are now, and tell me that isn't. And in a comparison, look at Monday Night Football ratings from that same time period till now. Monday Night Football has kept way more of its audience than Monday Night Raw has. Just my opinion. I think it's one of the things that's driven the most current fans out of wrestling. Staying on that same vein, one of the most reviled moments in Monday Night Raw history, the Katy Vick segment. This was done in such poor taste in a time where fans had grown up and had grown out of the Attitude Era. They may have got away with this during the Attitude Era because there was so much greatness around there. But at the time they did this, it was just in poor taste, and no one really wanted. Who really wanted to see a necrophilia act? I mean, come on. Even if it was fake, it drove fans away. I know a lot of fans personally that told me they stopped watching because of this, and that's again why it was considered for the list. Last but not least, on the best of the rest, Tony Schiavone on Monday Nitro saying Cactus Jack, or Mick Foley, who used to wrestle here as Cactus Jack, is going to win their WWE World Championship, or WWF at the time. That'll put butts in the seats. There's been major documentation about this, but literally 60% of their audience turned off WCW Nitro and went to WWF at the time and never came back. They didn't take into effect how beloved Mick Foley, Cactus Jack, Mankind, whatever you call him, they did not take into effect how beloved he was and how many fans wanted to see him succeed. They thought they were doing a disservice to the WWF, where they were literally promoting, hey, that guy that you love, Mick Foley, he's going to win the World Championship tonight. You should probably go watch that instead of this garbage that we're going to play. For that reason, and the reason that it drove so many fans away that never came back, it was considered for this list. Now, before we get into number one, if you think I put something too high, something too low, left something off the list altogether, let me know what you think down here in the comments. Hit that like button, share, subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Our number one thing that drove wrestling fans away from wrestling, the Chris Benoit murder-suicide. I really hate talking about this. Much like myself, there is a strong number of fans that really loved Chris Benoit, the wrestler, that he was either their favorite or one of their favorites. He was absolutely one of my favorites. I enjoyed everything about Chris Benoit, the wrestler. And then this happened. And it was hard. It was hard on fans like myself. You had to look and you had to say, do I want to watch this anymore? Do I want to watch a show where after everything starts coming out that CTE is part of the reasoning? That his brain was that of an 80-year-old Alzheimer's patient. It was just a painful thing to go through as a fan, as someone that liked Chris Benoit, as someone that liked Nancy Sullivan, a.k.a. Woman. I thought she was an amazing valet/manager. I think she was more of a manager than a valet, which was revolutionary in the time. Her and Sherry Martel, and Missy Hyatt to an extent, were the forefronts of women being more managers than just valets. I had been a fan of hers from her ECW and WCW time. And this was just, when you hear it, and you hear what happened, much like I said with the heart attack with Fritz Eric, and even though that was fake, this being real, it really put a lot of things into perspective for wrestling fans. And a lot of fans turned away and still haven't come back. And for that reason, it's why it's number one on the list. With all that being said, if you've made it this far into the show, let me put in the comments, let's put something happy in the comments. Give me a happy thought in the comments if you made it this far, to let me know you made it to the end. It could be you like watching puppies run, or you seen a rainbow, or whatever your happy thought may be. You just got engaged, you just had a baby. Put it in the comments, because this ended on a pretty negative note. With all that being said, My name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat Top 10.